Pushing Back the Shadows, support and awareness for mental health. Hello and welcome to episode 23 of the Pushing Back the Shadows podcast. My name's Alex Davis. I'm the main author and the founder of Pushing Back the Shadows. So in today's episode, I wanted to look at kind of our struggle itself and how it is exactly what it says on the tin. It's our struggle, and kind of also the role that we play within that struggle. It's something that I've struggled with over the past couple of months, mostly through doctor's appointments and interactions with other people in terms of my own struggle, because those of you who follow my journey will know that I struggle with depression, with anxiety, and also insomnia. And it's something that, if I'm completely honest, it frustrates me. It really frustrates me. So, a little background for you. I went to the doctors fairly recently, and this is something that's come up over the past couple of months as well, because one of the symptoms that I experience is that I can go from being really kind of down in the doldrums to suddenly being very, very high, almost high as a kite, to then going back down right into the doldrums. And it's something that that I think is very symptomatic of bipolar. Now, having done some research, I do recognise that bipolar is very much over a long period of time. You get a long period of those down and depressive moments. You also get a long period of time of the more high and very manic episodes. So I understand that it's not kind of the classic bipolar that you'd normally think of. However, what I think it is kind of a more rapid cycling or even ultra rapid cycling bipolar. Now, I've talked to a number of people, predominantly on social media, those who actually suffer with bipolar themselves, and they've turned around and they've said, well, yeah, it does sound like it. It sounds a lot like kind of the more ultra rapid cycling version of bipolar. Interestingly enough, though, when I've gone and I've asked a professional about this, so my therapist or my doctor, they've been very dismissive of the possibility, which kind of surprises me, really. So this is what I wanted to have a look at. It's really what I wanted to look at and see whether or not there is more to it than that, or whether it's something where we find that actually we do have more experience than the professionals. We are more of an expert than the professionals or than anybody else around us. So let's take a look at that, shall we? You're listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. So just to put this out there immediately, I do not have any kind of qualification in this area. Okay, I'm not a professional in that sense. I am a mental health advocate, I'm a blogger, I'm a podcaster, but this is all done off my own experiences, both as a sufferer and both as somebody who actively tries to help people and support people with mental health struggles. So there's no kind of qualification in there. This is just my experiences and other people's experiences as well. So my question really is, do we, as the people who suffer with mental health issues, do we have more experience and actually know more about our conditions than the professionals? Be it a therapist, be it a doctor, be it whoever you could think of as a professional. Do we have more experience and know more about our conditions than they do? It's kind of a tough question to answer, isn't it? Because we think of, if we're struggling, we wouldn't think of going to, say, our neighbour around the corner to ask for that kind of advice about mental health. We think of going to a doctor, to a therapist, to somebody who really does know what they're talking about. And certainly in that respect, they have the experience, they have the knowledge, and it's something that we would turn to when we do need those kinds of questions answering. Now, I am actually writing a post about this as well. It's something that I've come across a lot recently, and experience is something that I do feel pretty strongly about. Not necessarily in the, oh, you've got to have experience to know what you're talking about kind of sense, but more in the way that the professionals will come down with, oh, I've done this many years of studying, I've had this much experience, and in my professional opinion, it is this. And sometimes that professional opinion can get in the way. Now, as I mentioned, I'm writing the post about this. It will be called Evaluating Experience, and for those of you who are our patrons, and this is for $5 plus patrons as part of the reward scheme, it will be posted as a rough draft on there within, well, it should already be up there at the moment. So if you want to check out get a sneak peek into the full post, you can just go over to www.patreon.com/AlexDavisPBTS. The link is also in the description. But anyway, looking at our own experiences, I often find that a lot of the time I know more of what I'm talking about than other people. And I'm going to break this down into a couple of categories, looking at the friends and family side, but also looking at the professional side. Because, as I say, it's something I've struggled with. So a little bit of background. Over the past few months, I've been identifying a couple of symptoms within myself that I don't think necessarily pertain solely to depression or anxiety. I found that I've got, when I'm in my depressive stage, I'm really, really, really low. But when I'm not in that depressive stage, I'm kind of really, manic isn't quite the right word, but I do get very, very wound up in kind of almost an excitable and elated way. And there doesn't necessarily seem to be much in the way of middle ground. It's something that Cheryl's commented on a couple of times. She said, it's like a little bit like that old rhyme, nursery rhyme you'd have. There was a little girl who had a little curl right in the middle of her forehead. When she was good, she was very, very good. When she was bad, she was horrid. And okay, I'm not a little girl, but I do have a little curl right in the centre of my forehead, but that's not the point I'm making. It's when I'm bad, I'm very, very, very scary bad. But when I'm good, I'm almost through the roof. Now, those of you listening might think, okay, that sounds like bipolar. But the catch is that this does not happen over long periods of time. It's not good for a couple of weeks, then bad for a couple of weeks, or even months. This happens usually within a matter of days, or even within a matter of hours. Now, that's not typically bipolar. It's, as in, not your typical variety of bipolar. This is more something that would fall into the category of something that's known as ultra-rapid cycling bipolar. And everyone I've spoken to, mostly on social media, who has bipolar, has come back and said, yes, that's what it sounds like. So, it sounds like I've got bipolar. So I go to the doctor and I ask him. He says, well, the best thing to do is to ask your therapist. That will be your first port of call. So I go to the therapist and he says that I'm on the scale, somewhere on the spectrum for bipolar, same way you can be on the spectrum for autism, but I don't have bipolar. I have some kind of personality disorder. Well, it strikes me that given that my antidepressants aren't working as well as they should, that maybe there's more to this than meets the eye. Maybe I actually do have bipolar, the ultra-rapid cycling version, because that fits what I'm feeling. But I find it interesting that both my doctor and my therapist, and even the therapist who was brought in for a second opinion, almost refused to entertain the notion. No, it's not bipolar, it's a mood disorder, end of story. But is it? And this is the part that I want to look at, because I say, this is exactly what I'm feeling. I say, I know how I am, and in a 10-15 minute consultation, you can't really assess that. I've talked it through at length with Cheryl, who sees me more than anybody else that I know, and she is convinced, having done her own research, the first thing that she said, before I even put the word bipolar out there, that's the first thing that she said. Now, she's got no experience of it. She's not had it herself. She doesn't know anybody who's got it. No, she knows one or two people, but not to the extent of she knows how it all works. And so it was interesting that that was the first thing that she said. And it strikes me that sometimes the professionals don't want to listen. I've made the case numerous times. I've gone back and said, look, I'm not happy with the diagnosis. I want to be reassessed. And each time I get pushed back with the, well, in my experience, this is what it is. And is that the be-all and end-all? Is our experience actually worth that much? Is it worth more than the value that is currently put on it? I'm interested in your thoughts. I'm going to look at how that pertains to friends and family, and also the reasoning behind why I think our experience, in some ways, not always, but in some ways, can be more valuable than that of the professionals. I'll be right back. Pushing Back the Shadows, support and awareness for mental health. One of the things that kind of sparked this thought off in my head was a conversation that I had with one of our followers, and she asked me the question, do you find that the line, "you seem so much better," is kind of almost heartbreaking? Now, granted, I don't necessarily find it heartbreaking, but I do find that line very, very difficult to deal with. It's things that friends and family have said to me before, and my response is usually, yes, but you don't see me as often. You don't know what the bad days are like. It's true, isn't it? They don't see us quite as often as maybe they ought to be able to make that kind of assessment. However, recently and I've referenced this before, episode 17 of our podcast, I talked about the power of perspective and how sometimes people with an outside perspective can actually see more than we can in the situation. So it's kind of swings and roundabouts. It's 50% of one, 50% of the other. We can see what is actually going on inside of us. We know just how bad it gets, or how good it gets. We know the in-situation picture. And that's a very clumsy way of putting it, but you know what I'm trying to get at. We are in the situation. We've got the experience. But for the friends and family sitting on the sidelines, kind of looking in, and I don't mean that in kind of a negative way, sitting on the sidelines being more kind of from the outside of the struggle looking in, because they can't be in the struggle as such. Depression, anxiety, bipolar, they're very individual illnesses. So while people can come alongside it, they can support you, it's not something that they can be fully immersed in. But for the friends and family kind of off to one side, it's easier for them to see almost the progress that we're making, if that makes sense. And I think this is what I touched on in episode 17. It's something that they can see that we can't necessarily see ourselves, and it's difficult to kind of get that across. You know, like I mentioned with, in terms of my dad, when we were building the baseboard, he said that he was looking for things, he couldn't see them, and me being stood up, being slightly removed from that situation, I could see what was going on. And it was something very much that that struck me with our mental health struggles. Sometimes people on the outside can see more of the progress that we are making than we can. Think of it in terms of like a small child. And if you haven't seen them in ages, when you see them again, you can see how much they've grown. To the parent, you don't necessarily see that. The example I can give is when my 3-year-old was here a couple of months ago. You could see that she was shorter than the bookcase that's in the living room. And then suddenly it was, oh my goodness, your head is actually above the level of the bookcase. When did that happen? When did you grow? And it's those kinds of things that you notice. So sometimes the experience of friends and family can be very, very important. They'll have situations that they've been in that can help us. Like, for example, when I started on sertraline, my dad was able to say, well, yeah, I've been on it. This is how it affected me. Alternatively, I've written a post about identifying our struggle and how it's not our identity. Our struggle does not define us. Again, that was something that my dad had said. And it's one of those things where that experience can be important. However, on the flip side, as I already mentioned, we are in the situation. We know what's going on. We know how it affects us on a daily basis. And therefore, realistically, we are the experts on ourselves. Which is true, isn't it? We're the experts on ourselves. Granted, there are people who can see differently to us, who will be able to push us, much like a teacher or a coach would do. But we know what we can and cannot do. We know how we do or do not feel. We are the experts on ourselves. But how does that pertain to the professionals? Let's have a look, shall we? Pushing Back the Shadows, support and awareness for mental health. So with professionals, they have a different kind of experience, and I'm sure we'd all agree with this one. They have the years of study, they have the qualifications, and they'll have their own experience of diagnosing people and treating people on a regular basis. But realistically, is their experience as valuable as we would say it is? Now, let me just be completely clear with you. I am not saying don't go and see the professional, because in the first instance, that should be your port of call. Self-treating, self-medicating, self-diagnosing, that isn't the way forwards. I know I've just been talking about how I believe my struggle to be bipolar, but that's based on my experiences with the medication, how the medication doesn't seem to be working, and just how my symptoms seem to be. Definitely go and see the professional first. But in terms of the ongoing visitations with the professional, by all means get that diagnosis in the first instance. See the therapist for the first couple of days. But if you think that something isn't right, if you feel that something isn't quite working as it should be, raise the concern. It's far too easy, especially with things like depression, to kind of sit back and say, oh, well, he's told me that it's this condition treated by this drug, so this is what I need to do, and then kind of leave it there, sit it in the back seat. But if you feel that it's not right, you need to raise that, because your experiences are just as important as the professionals. Your voice matters more. It's like somebody with physical illness, like maybe a broken leg, going into the doctor and saying, I think my leg's broken, and the doctor turning around and saying, oh dear, you've got quite a few lesions and lacerations on your arm, we need to treat those. And you're then sat there going, but my leg, maybe? No, we need to do your arm for it, my leg. You know, it's that sort of, and yes, that's a ridiculous example, but it's that sort of scenario. We know what the problem is. We know how we feel. Granted, the doctor cannot get inside our heads and have a good route around and see exactly how we feel. He can't step into our shoes. But we have to be the ones to tell him that. And if we feel something is not right, we are allowed to speak up and say so. To bring it back to my earlier example, I'm convinced that there is something more going on here than just a simple mood disorder or personality disorder. So I'm pushing for it. I'm pushing for it to be thoroughly looked into. And that should be how it should be for you guys too. If you feel something's not right, don't let the doctors or the therapists just fob you off with their professional experience. I'll say that again. If you feel something is not right, do not let them fob you off with their professional experience, because realistically, it is not the be-all and end-all. To put it into a different context, if you go into a relationship with someone, it's not going to work if it's one-sided. It cannot be one person doing all the giving, one person doing all the taking. Because realistically, it won't work that way. The one person will be burnt out, the other person will be lazy. It works differently as well. That's just one example that I can think of. But in any relationship, there needs to be a give and a take from both parties. Likewise, when you go and see the doctor about your mental health, there needs to be the give and the take. Yes, the doctor will diagnose you. Yes, he will give you the prescriptions. But he also needs to listen. He needs to listen to what you're saying, to how you're feeling, and to take that seriously. It's not a case of, oh, you're a bit depressed, we'll throw some medication at you. They need to get to the root problem. Now, to give you kind of another example, I seem to like my examples today, and I don't really know why, but I had an experience with a particular doctor. Now, this was before Sharon and I kind of pushed and said, no, he needs to see the same doctor every single time. I ended up seeing, I think it was one of these kind of locum doctors who'd come in, didn't really know my case, but it really, really felt like I was sat in the Spanish Inquisition. You know, she went through some of the questions. All I was doing was saying that my medication wasn't really working. I think I needed to change it, start coming off. I believe this was metazapine at the time, which for the record was brilliant for my sleep, just didn't really do much for my depression. And she started asking questions, as you would expect, you know, what, so on and so forth. And we got to my favourite question. Have you had any history of depression? No, says I. This is my first time, because at that point, I think this was back in April or May of last year. And my depression, this particular episode, if you like, had started around August the previous year, so August 2016, and it had been going on from then up until this appointment. And I'd never had it before, at least not as far as I was aware. That was kind of the thing I was hoping therapy would help me find out. And she makes a note of that, and then a couple of questions down the line she says, any previous episodes of self-harm? I say yes. And she looks at me and she says, well, how can that be? You just said you don't have a history of depression, so how can you have a history of self-harm? I say, well, it happened the last time was in December. What do you want me to tell you? That's in the past. I'm not doing it at the moment. It is in the past. And it was one of those where it really came across where she was saying, well, if you're still in the same episode of depression, you can't be in a separate episode of self-harm or something along those lines. And it was very intimidating with her coming down with her professional opinion like that and pretty much telling me that I was wrong. And yet I was the one sat there going, well, no, I can tell you when I last self-harmed. I can tell you it has not happened since. But I can also adamantly tell you I am still in the very same episode of depression. What more do you want me to tell you? So realistically, doctors need to listen as well. They can't just do all the talking and assume and control the conversation. They need to listen to what you're saying as well and take that all on board. So to wrap it up, everybody's experiences are important. The doctor's experiences are important because they'll have the technical side, they'll have the qualifications and that side of experience. For friends and family, they'll be able to see a slightly different picture to us, and therein lies their own power in experience. And then for us, our experience is right there in the situation, and that in itself is valuable. And all three of them together is what makes up the big picture. All three of them are what we need to successfully be moving forwards, to be working together. We need our experiences, the experiences of the friends and family, and the experiences of the professionals, as unpleasant as some of them may be to hear. So for those of you who are struggling with mental health issues at the moment, your voice matters. You might not feel like it, but your voice matters. Yes, listen to the other experiences, the other people, but remember that your voice is critical in getting the care, the treatment, the help that you need. For those of you who are friends and family or medical professionals, you do have a say and you are entitled to your own opinion, but you do need to listen to what the sufferer is saying. It's not as cut and dry as this is what it looks like to you, so this is how it must be. Because effectively that's how stigma gets going. So you need to listen to the sufferer. In a nutshell, both sides need to listen to each other. There needs to be that give and take. Otherwise we are never going to move forwards. So that is all from me for today. I am interested, as always, to hear your thoughts. So if you like, you can drop me a comment or drop me an email to let me know what you think about this. Or even if there are any experiences that are similar to mine or any experiences that are different, I'd love to hear them. But that's all from me for now, so I will join you next week in episode 24. You guys take care. You've been listening to Pushing Back the Shadows. To find out more, head over to pushingbacktheshadows.com and hit subscribe to get all of our latest updates straight to your inbox. Alternatively, connect with us on Facebook, which is facebook.com/AlexDavisPBTS, or you can visit us on Twitter at AlexDavisPBTS. Enable Pushing Back the Shadows to continue supporting people in the mental health community, their friends and their family. By pledging just $1 a month, you could help us to continue supporting people with depression, with anxiety, with bipolar and other mental illnesses. You can also unlock exclusive rewards, behind the scenes, sneak previews of upcoming posts and much, much more. So head over to www.patreon.com/AlexDavisPBTS to find out more.